Okay, and we're going to come on to a little bit of the history in a second, but can I just put to you that there was clearly an attempt, a hope, I would say, by Buckingham Palace to maybe dampen down this story, maybe put a lid on it last Friday, and it's done anything but that.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. This was damage limitation that we saw on Friday evening, really at the last minute, considering that Mrs. Giuffre's memoir was coming out today. It was damage limitation in which the Duke said he was stepping back from his title, the Duke of York, and no longer being a member of the Order of the Garter. And really, instead, I think, of dampening down the story, as you say, it's actually intensified it with people saying, but why didn't he step back from this before? In 2019, he was no longer a working royal. In 2022, he gave up his military titles, and that was really due to a petition from members of the armed forces saying we don't want Andrew to represent us anymore, considering what has gone on. And now he stepped back from the Duke of York title. People are still saying, well, didn't he step back from it? He could still use it if he wants. And I think lots of people think maybe he's using it in private. Really, what people are now thinking about are these two main areas. Should he be stripped of it in Parliament? Because the King can't take Duke of York off Andrew. It has to be taken through an Act of Parliament. And as John was saying there, Parliament is saying we don't want to get involved. But should the Parliament actually formally strip him of his Duke of York title? And should he move out of Royal Lodge? You showed some footage there of Royal Lodge during Rhiannon's very interesting report. And that really showed how gigantic Royal Lodge here is. It's a huge property, 30 rooms, doesn't even describe how large it is. It dates back to the 17th century. It's worth an absolute fortune. I mean, worth tens of millions of pounds. And he's living in it for a peppercorn rent. And I think people's focus is increasingly going to be on that. They're going to be saying, but the Crown Estate pays for this, and we essentially are funding the Crown. It's the Crown Estate, we're paying for it, and why does Andrew still get to live there? So the story is not dampened. It's literally gone up in greater
flames. Is there a sense, and it's been suggested by others as well, that actually what they're trying to do is kind of keep Andrew slightly inside the tents, as in there might be a fear in Buckingham Palace if they completely expel him effectively from the royal family, that he might go off and do things that could do even more damage, write books, sit down on television interviews, spill all the beans.
Well, we might consider that when Andrew gave that interview, which really started everything in 2019 to Emily Maitlis on the BBC Newsnight programme, that we remember that after that, in which he said all these, expressed no sympathy for the victims, and said he had stopped seeing Epstein after 2010, and said all that, those ridiculous alibis about Pizza Express and all the rest of it. He thought he'd acquitted himself marvellously. Andrew was very pleased with how it went. And one might say, well, if that's what Andrew feels has gone well in terms of a television interview, what would he say when he's actually trying to say something that that does damage the royal family, because he thought he'd rescued everyone's reputations then. So certainly Andrew could say these matters, but there is a difference between putting Andrew totally out of the royal family and also saying to him, you can move into another property in Windsor. There are many, many properties on the Windsor estate, many much smaller properties. And we know that Charles has tried to encourage Andrew to move to Frogmore Cottage.
And he's just not moving. And Kate, just very finally on all of this, is this in part what I seem to be suggesting earlier, that this is kind of the quagmire of our constitution, is that it's such a hodgepodge, there's no kind of set rules, and we go through this endless process all the time because effectively there's no process, I suppose, in place.
Yes, you're absolutely right. There's no process. It's all a hodgepodge. There's no real constitution. We have a vision of a constitutional monarch, but we don't really have any rules or even a contract that they sign. And we have a situation in which the royal family is both a business and has a constitutional role, but also they're a family. So you can't fire someone in the same way that we would if we were an employee being touched by allegations like this. So this is this sort of quagmire. And I think the consequence of this is also there's a lot of, when it comes to the royal family, it is about message and it is about perception. And this is really about what the royal family represent. And clearly, there are a lot of people who feel it's very damaging. And I think the voices increasingly to strip the Duke of York of his title through Parliament are going to increase. And that could be very damaging to the royal family, because during the debate, MPs could say, well, all kinds of things. And these matters are going to be extremely damaging to the royal family. So certainly, Mrs. Giuffre is sadly no longer with us. We have to remember the suffering of the victims under Epstein. She's no longer with us, but certainly her book is having a huge amount of effect and a huge amount of power.
Yeah, massive. A massive effect, Kate, and as you say, if it comes down to messaging or perception, frankly, at the moment, the royal family are not doing well on both. We really appreciate your time and your insight this evening, Kate Williams there. Well, speaking about what may well happen in Parliament, we have got that MP, Lisa Smart, with us from the Liberal Democrats, a rising star, I think John Craig described you as. But Lisa, let's talk about this. What do you want to see happen here?
So I think the public have a right to expect a level of transparency they don't feel they've got so far. We've had the lease emerge this afternoon of Prince Andrew's stay at Royal Lodge, and Kate was talking about some of the details of the scale of this property. Looking at the details of the lease, I think people are right to want to look into that a little bit more. Where did the money come from to begin with to fund these fairly lavish refurbishments? And how is it that he's been able to live the life of a prince on a peppercorn rent, but at the cost to the taxpayer?
Well, there's lots of suggestions that that money may have come from the late Queen.
And I think people are right to have questions about that. I think the public need to have a sense of trust in our institutions. And we talk in Parliament a lot about how that trust is crumbling in lots of different ways. And I'd include the royal family in that. I think it's the right thing to expect a level of transparency around these financial arrangements, around the Crown Estate, because it is at the taxpayer's expense and people have got a right to expect that.
Yeah, but the thing is, and this is why it's so complicated, isn't it, in part, because the royal family are a public institution that we do fund, but they're also a private family who also have their own ways of generating income. And isn't this the problem? Parliament has got a very kind of unique, let's call it, I was going to call it an odd, but let's call it a unique relationship with the royal family.
Yeah, I think both of those things.
Do you think Parliament needs to assert its sovereignty here, essentially? So do you think, essentially, if the King is not willing to get rid of Prince Andrew's title, Parliament should step in?
I think when it comes to finances and when we're coming to the Crown Estate and when we're coming to taxpayers' expenses, taxpayers' money, I think Parliament has a really important role to play there. And you'll have heard from some parliamentary colleagues talking about scrutiny, talking about transparency. I think that's absolutely right. I think, Kate, and you were talking about our lack of constitutional clarity, perhaps, let's say. And titles are a matter for the King. I'm not sensing a clamour from very many colleagues from some of the larger parties to spend that precious legislative time in Parliament talking about Prince Andrew's titles or not. We're absolutely right to think about the victims.
I think given the fact that most MPs would probably vote for it, I'm not entirely sure it would eat up much legislative time. But the point here is, if you leave it into the hands of the monarch and the monarch's not willing to act, even if public opinion wants things to change, then surely Parliament then has a right to assert.
I think there are many things in this country the public want to change. My inbox is full of people complaining about things they want to be different. I don't think, personally, that there is enough of a clamour in Parliament to spend that precious legislative time focusing on this. I'm not getting a sense from the public that it's their priority that we think about the titles of one individual or not. I do think that a level of transparency and a level of scrutiny should be something the public expect. Prince Andrew has embarrassed the King. He has gone completely contrary to the values that we as Britain hold dear. And I think the public are right to expect that transparency so that they can make their minds up whether it's on or not.
OK, Lisa, we appreciate your time this evening. Thank you very much indeed.